On Father's Day, my daughter shouted, "It's a family celebration. Don't come." I simply got in my car and left. 2 days later, I sold the house. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I stood on the front porch of what used to feel like my second home, holding a small wrapped gift and a card I'd spent 20 minutes writing. The June heat pressed against my back, but inside my chest, something much colder was forming. Through the screen door, I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, children's voices mixing with adult conversation. My grandchildren were in there, probably wondering where Grandpa was. I knocked gently, the way I always did. Footsteps approached, and I straightened my shirt, forcing a smile. When the door opened, Stella appeared. But her expression wasn't the one I'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years since Margaret's death. This wasn't the tired tolerance I'd learned to expect. This was something sharper, colder. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice carried an edge that made my stomach tighten. "It's Father's Day, sweetheart. I brought something for the kids and thought maybe we could. It's a family celebration." The words exploded from her lips like she'd been holding them back all day. "You can't just show up here expecting to be included. We're having private family time." The gift in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Behind her, I caught glimpses of Marcus, her husband, watching from the kitchen doorway. He didn't move to invite me in. He didn't even nod. My 7-year-old grandson Tommy appeared behind Stella's legs, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandpa Walter, Mom, Grandpa's here," he called out excitedly. Stella's hand moved to Tommy's shoulder, gently but firmly guiding him back inside. "Tommy, go play with your sister. Grandpa was just leaving." The words hit me like a physical blow. Just leaving. As if I hadn't spent the last 3 years trying to rebuild some kind of connection with the daughter who'd become a stranger after her mother's funeral. As if I hadn't been the one who helped her through college, who walked her down the aisle, who held her babies when they were born. "Stella, I don't understand. I'm your father. If anyone belongs at a Father's Day celebration, don't." Her voice dropped to a hiss, and she stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. "Just don't, Dad. You think you can keep inserting yourself into our lives whenever you want. We need space. We need to be a family without you constantly hovering." Hovering. The word stung worse than I expected. In the 3 years since Margaret died, I'd tried so hard to find the right balance. Not too present, not too absent. I'd helped when they asked, stayed away when they didn't. I thought I'd been respectful. I thought I'd been wanted, at least sometimes. "I wasn't hovering," I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "I just wanted to spend Father's Day with my family, with my grandchildren." Stella crossed her arms, and I saw so much of her mother in that gesture it made my chest ache. But Margaret would never have looked at me with such cold dismissal. "Your family?" she repeated, and there was something cruel in the way she emphasized the words. "Dad, you need to understand something. Marcus and we're building our own family traditions now, our own way of doing things. And frankly, having you around all the time is becoming uncomfortable." I felt my legs go weak. The porch seemed to tilt beneath me. 3 years of careful navigation, of trying to be helpful without being intrusive, of grieving my wife while watching my daughter drift further and further away, and this was where it led, to being told I was uncomfortable, a burden, an intruder in what should have been my own family. "Stella, please. Stella, I know things have been difficult since your mother passed, but I thought we were managing. I thought we were finding our way." She looked at me for a long moment, and I searched her face for any trace of the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee, who used to beg me to read just one more bedtime story. Instead, I saw impatience and something that looked almost like pity. "Dad, you need to find your own life. Stop trying to live through ours." The screen door opened behind her and Marcus appeared, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. He was a tall man, confident in a way that had always made me feel smaller. He placed a protective hand on Stella's shoulder. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, but he was looking at me, not her. "Dad was just leaving," Stella said quickly. Marcus nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "Walter, maybe it's better if you call next time before coming over. We had plans today. Plans on Father's Day. Plans that didn't include the father." I looked down at the wrapped gift in my hands, a photo album I'd put together with pictures of Margaret and the grandchildren, something I thought they might treasure. Now it felt foolish, presumptuous. I set it gently on the porch railing. "I'll just leave this here," I said quietly. Neither of them moved to take it. I walked back to my car slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. Behind me, I heard the front door open and close, heard voices resuming their cheerful chatter. The celebration continued without me, as if I'd never been there at all. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel and stared back at the house where my daughter lived, where my grandchildren were growing up, where I was no longer welcome, the house I'd helped them buy, the mortgage I'd co-signed when Marcus's credit wasn't quite good enough, the down payment that had come from Margaret's and my savings account. I thought about Margaret then, about what she'd say if she could see this moment. She'd always been the bridge between Stella and me, translating when we couldn't understand each other, smoothing over the rough patches. Without her, we'd lost our interpreter, our mediator. Without her, I'd apparently become expendable. The drive home passed in a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar pain. My house, the house Margaret and I had shared for 32 years, felt cavernous and cold when I walked through the front door. The Father's Day cards I'd received from Tommy and Lucy last year still sat on my desk, their construction paper and crayon artwork bright against the dark wood. Would there be any this year? Would they even remember me in a month, a year? I sank into Margaret's favorite chair, the one I'd kept exactly as she'd left it, and tried to understand what had just happened. How had I become a stranger to my own daughter? How had loving her, wanting to be part of her life, become such a burden? The silence in the house pressed against my ears, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock Margaret had insisted we buy for our anniversary 10 years ago. Each second felt like a small hammer striking against something fragile inside my chest. For the first time in 3 years, I began to wonder if my daughter was right. Maybe it was time to stop trying to be part of a family that no longer wanted me. 2 days. That's all it took to change everything. I stared at the sold sign that the realtor had just hammered into my front lawn, the sound of metal hitting earth echoing through the quiet Tuesday morning. My neighbors, the Hendersons, were peeking through their curtains, probably wondering what had gotten into old Walter. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was openly gawking from her porch, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. I couldn't blame them. Even I wasn't entirely sure what had gotten into me. The decision had come to me Monday night, somewhere between my 3rd glass of wine and the 4th time I'd replayed Stella's words in my head. You need to find your own life. The phrase had been bouncing around my skull for 48 hours, gaining weight and meaning with each repetition. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time I stopped clinging to a life that clearly didn't want me in it. My phone buzzed in my pocket for what felt like the 100th time since 9 this morning. I pulled it out to see Stella's name flashing on the screen. Call number 37. I'd stopped counting after 20, but the phone kept track for me. 64 missed calls total, it said. 64 desperate attempts to reach me after 3 years of making me feel invisible. I declined the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Mr. Hartwell, the realtor, a sharp-dressed woman named Janet, who'd handled the sale with remarkable efficiency, approached with her final paperwork. The cash offer really expedited things. Are you sure you don't need more time to pack? This is happening very fast. Fast. That was the point. If I'd given myself time to think, time to reconsider, I would have talked myself out of it. I would have found reasons to stay, excuses to keep living in this mausoleum of memories, waiting for my daughter to remember I existed. I'm sure, I told Janet, signing the last document with hands that barely trembled. The buyers can have it as is. Everything's included except for what's in my suitcases. She nodded, though I caught the concerned look she exchanged with her assistant. They probably thought I was having some kind of breakdown. They weren't wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. I almost laughed. In 3 years, Marcus had never called me, never initiated a single conversation. But now, with the house sold and their safety net suddenly gone, he found my number quickly enough. The thing about being treated like an ATM for years is that you start to recognize the patterns. The way conversations always seem to steer toward money. The way small emergencies always seem to coincide with my presence. The way gratitude was always temporary, but expectations were permanent. I remembered the conversation from just 2 months ago, when Marcus had cornered me after Tommy's birthday party. He'd been unusually friendly, asking about my retirement plans, whether I'd considered downsizing. At the time, I'd thought he was being considerate, maybe even caring about my future. Now I realized he'd been fishing, trying to gauge my finances, probably wondering when he and Stella might inherit. The phone rang again. Stella. I watched her name flash on the screen and felt something cold settle in my chest. How many times had she called me in the past year just to talk? How many times had she asked how I was doing, whether I was lonely, if I needed anything that wasn't related to her immediate convenience? I couldn't remember a single one, but I could remember plenty of other calls. The time their washing machine broke and they needed $800 just until Marcus's bonus came through. The time Stella's car needed new tires and they were a little tight this month. The time Tommy needed money for a school trip and they hated to ask, but knew I'd understand. I'd understood every time. I'd open my wallet every time. I'd been the reliable father, the dependable grandfather, the man they could count on to solve their problems with a check and a smile. Standing on the lawn of the house I'd just sold, watching Janet drive away with paperwork that would change everything, I wondered when I'd become so disposable everywhere, except when they needed something. My phone buzzed with a text from Stella. "Dad, please call me back. We need to talk. This is important." Important. Everything was important when they needed something from me. My feelings, my loneliness, my grief. Those things were never important enough to warrant a phone call. I started walking toward my car, 2 suitcases in hand. Everything else. 32 years of marriage, 3 years of widowhood, a lifetime of accumulated possessions, belonged to strangers now. The buyers, a young couple with twin toddlers, had been thrilled to get a fully furnished house. They'd probably never know that they were buying my daughter's inheritance along with the property. Another call. This time I answered. "Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. What's this about selling the house? Mrs. Henderson called Aunt Rose and she called me, and nobody understands what's happening. You can't just sell the house without telling anyone." The panic in her voice was real, but it wasn't concern for me. It was fear of losing something she'd counted on having someday. "I can sell my own house whenever I want, Stella." "But Dad, that house, it's been in the family for decades. It's where I grew up, where the kids come to visit." "When do they come to visit?" I cut her off, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. When was the last time Tommy and Lucy came to see their grandfather just because they wanted to? Not for a birthday party where they had to come, not because you needed a babysitter, but just to spend time with me? Silence. I could practically hear her scrambling for an answer that wouldn't sound as hollow as we both knew it was. "That's not, Dad, you're being unreasonable. Families don't work like that. We all have busy lives, but that doesn't mean we don't care. And you can't just make major decisions without consulting the family." The family. 2 days ago, I wasn't part of the family. Now, suddenly, I was required to consult them before making decisions about my own life. "Where are you going?" Marcus's voice came through the phone, distant but audible. He'd taken the phone from Stella. "That's not really your concern anymore, is it?" "Look, Walter, I think we got off on the wrong foot Sunday." Stella was stressed. The kids were wound up. Maybe things came out wrong. But selling the house? That's extreme. That's the kind of decision you make when you're not thinking clearly. Not thinking clearly. As if the only rational response to being rejected by your own daughter was to continue living in the shadow of that rejection, waiting patiently for the next crumb of acknowledgement. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 3 years. Dad, please." Stella had taken the phone back, and now she was crying, real tears, from the sound of it. "I'm sorry about Sunday, okay? I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you, but you can't just disappear on us. What about the kids? What about me? What about her?" It always came back to what about her? What about her needs, her comfort, her plans? What about the safety net I provided? The financial security, the knowledge that Dad would always be there to fix whatever went wrong. "Stella, for 3 years I've been trying to figure out how to fit into your life, how to be helpful without being intrusive, how to be present without being a burden. And Sunday you made it very clear that I don't fit. So I'm taking your advice. I'm finding my own life." "But the house, Dad. That house is worth. It's our security. It's the kids' college funds. It's our future." And there it was. The real reason for the 64 phone calls. Not concern for my welfare, not worry about my state of mind. The house was their security, their future. I was just the inconvenient guardian of their inheritance. I reached my car and threw the suitcases into the trunk. The buyers would take possession tomorrow. I'd already booked a hotel room for the night, and after that, for the first time in decades, I had no obligations, no one depending on me, nowhere I had to be. "The money from the house is mine to do with as I choose," I said quietly. "Just like my time, my energy, and my presence, all mine to give or withhold as I see fit. Dad, you're scaring me. I almost laughed. Now I was scaring her. After years of taking me for granted, of treating me like a convenient utility that could be turned on and off as needed, my daughter was finally scared. Not scared for me, but scared of what life might look like without her reliable backup plan. Don't be scared, Stella. Be independent. Isn't that what families do? Build their own traditions, their own way of doing things. I hung up before she could respond and turned off the phone. The silence was immediate and profound. No more buzzing, no more demands, no more guilty obligations. I got in my car and drove away from the only life I'd ever known, feeling lighter with every mile. The hotel room was generic and sterile, exactly what I needed. No memories lurking in the corners, no photographs staring at me from side tables, no echoes of Margaret's laughter bouncing off familiar walls. Just beige walls, a firm bed, and the kind of silence that let me think without drowning in nostalgia. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a photograph I'd salvaged from my desk drawer before leaving. It was from Stella's wedding day, 7 years ago. She looked radiant in her white dress, Marcus handsome and confident beside her. I was in the background, beaming with pride, my arm around Margaret, who was dabbing tears from her eyes with a lace handkerchief. That was before Marcus started reshaping my daughter into someone I barely recognized. Before the slow, subtle campaign that transformed me from beloved father to inconvenient obligation. It hadn't happened overnight. That's what made it so insidious, so easy to dismiss as imagination or oversensitivity. It started with small things that seemed reasonable, even considerate. "Walter, you don't need to help with the dishes. You've done enough," Marcus would say at family dinners, gently taking plates from my hands. At first I thought he was being polite, saving me from kitchen duty, but then I noticed he'd steer Stella away too, creating a private bubble where they could talk without me overhearing. "Dad, Marcus thinks we should handle the kids' discipline ourselves," Stella had told me one afternoon when I'd tried to redirect Tommy's tantrum. "It's important for us to establish our authority." Again, it sounded reasonable. Good parenting practice. But it meant another area where my input was no longer welcome, another way I was being edged out of my grandchildren's lives. The financial requests started about 2 years into their marriage. Small at first, always presented as temporary inconveniences. Marcus had been between jobs, or his commission was delayed, or there was an unexpected expense, and I helped, because that's what fathers do. That's what Margaret would have wanted me to do. But somewhere in the back of my mind, even then, I'd wondered why a man who claimed to be building a stable life for my daughter seemed to have so many financial emergencies. Why his confidence never seemed to extend to actually managing money responsibly. Margaret had wondered too, though she'd been more diplomatic about it than I was capable of being now. "Do you think Marcus is really trying to find steady work?" She'd asked me one evening after another request for help with their mortgage payment. We were sitting in our garden, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. It was one of our last peaceful conversations before her cancer diagnosis changed everything. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's very charming, very good at explaining why things aren't his fault. But it seems like there's always something, always a reason why he can't quite get ahead." I'd defended him then, told Margaret that young couples struggled sometimes, that we'd been lucky with our stable careers and shouldn't judge. But Margaret had just nodded and said, "I hope you're right, Walt. I hope I'm just being an old woman who worries too much." She'd been dying then, though we didn't know it yet. The fatigue we'd attributed to her busy schedule at the library was actually her body beginning its final fight. Within 6 months, she'd be gone, and I'd be left to navigate the complicated dynamics of my daughter's marriage without her wisdom to guide me. That's when things really changed. Without Margaret as a buffer, Marcus became bolder in his subtle manipulations. He had opinions about everything I did, always delivered with a smile and framed as concern for my well-being. "Walter, don't you think it's time to consider downsizing? This big house must be lonely now." As if my grief was something to be managed by real estate decisions. "Maybe you should think about one of those senior communities, Walt. You'd have people your own age to talk to, activities to keep you busy," as if I was some pathetic old man who needed organized entertainment to give my life meaning. And Stella, drowning in her own grief and the overwhelming demands of new motherhood, seemed to absorb his suggestions like gospel truth. Her concern for me became tinged with impatience, her love conditional on my willingness to follow their advice about how I should live my life. The worst part was how reasonable it all sounded on the surface. They were concerned about me living alone. They wanted me to be happy and fulfilled. They thought I needed more social interaction, more purpose. What they really wanted was for me to become someone else's responsibility so they could inherit my house and stop feeling obligated to include me in their lives. I remembered the conversation that had finally opened my eyes about 6 months ago. I'd arrived early to pick up Tommy from school when Stella was sick, and I'd overheard Marcus on the phone in the kitchen. "I know it's taking longer than we thought," he was saying, his voice low but not quite quiet enough, but he's stubborn. He's got this idea that he needs to stay connected to the family, and Stella feels guilty about pushing too hard. A pause while the person on the other end responded. "No, the house is definitely worth waiting for. Prime location, paid-off mortgage. We just need to be patient and keep working on the senior living angle. Once he's settled somewhere, he'll realize how much better it is, and we won't have to feel bad about it." Another pause. "Trust me, he'll thank us eventually, and Stella will have her inheritance while she's young enough to enjoy it." I'd stood frozen in the hallway, holding Tommy's backpack and trying to process what I'd just heard, my own son-in-law discussing my life like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed, talking about my house, Margaret's and my home, like it was already his. But the worst part was the way he'd said, "Stella will have her inheritance." Not they'll inherit someday, or when Walter passes on, as if my death was simply a formality standing between them and what they considered rightfully theirs. That night I'd tried to talk to Stella about it. Not directly. I wasn't ready for that confrontation, but carefully, obliquely. "Honey, I hope you don't worry about me living in the house alone. I'm managing just fine, and it's important to me to stay where I have memories of your mother." Stella had looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her wedding ring the way she used to fidget with her hair when she was a child and trying to avoid trouble. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. That house is so big, and there's so much upkeep. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere with less responsibility?" Less responsibility. As if maintaining the home I'd shared with her mother was a burden rather than a comfort. As if the garden Margaret had planted, the rooms we'd decorated together, the spaces where we'd raised our daughter were just sources of stress to be eliminated. "I like the responsibility," I'd told her honestly. "It gives me purpose. It keeps me connected to your mother." "But Dad, you can't live in the past forever. Mom wouldn't want you to become a hermit because of the house." Hermit. When had spending time in my own home become hermit behavior? When had choosing to live among my memories instead of starting over become pathological? "I'm not living in the past, Stella. I'm living in the present, in a place that brings me comfort. There's a difference." She'd sighed then, the way she used to sigh when I wouldn't let her stay out past curfew or buy her the expensive jeans all her friends had. "Okay, Dad, but promise me you'll think about it, about what might make you happiest in the long run." I'd promised, because that's what fathers do. We promise to consider our children's wishes, even when those wishes are really someone else's agenda wrapped in concern. Now, sitting in this anonymous hotel room, I realized I had been thinking about it. For months, I'd been thinking about what would make me happiest. And what would make me happiest was being valued for more than my real estate and my bank account. What would make me happiest was having a daughter who called me because she missed me, not because she needed something. What would make me happiest was being welcomed into family celebrations instead of being told I was unwelcome at my own Father's Day. The photograph in my hands showed a different time, when I was the proud father walking his daughter down the aisle, when Margaret was alive to anchor our family with her unconditional love, when our future together seemed secure and warm, but that Stella was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a problem to be managed. That family was gone, dissolved by death and manipulation, and the slow poison of being treated like a burden. Maybe it was time to stop mourning what I'd lost and start building what I actually wanted. The coastal town of Millfield appeared around a bend in Highway 1 like something from a postcard I'd never been brave enough to believe in. Salt-weathered houses dotted the hillside, their windows catching the late afternoon sun like scattered coins. Below them, the Pacific stretched endlessly, its surface broken by the gentle rhythm of waves against weathered rocks. I'd been driving for 3 days, staying in roadside motels and eating at diners where nobody knew my name or expected anything from me. Each mile between me and my old life felt like shedding skin, leaving behind layers of obligation and disappointment until something lighter began to emerge underneath. Millfield had called to me from a travel magazine I'd found abandoned in a diner booth outside Sacramento. America's hidden coastal gems, the article had promised, and there was something about this particular gem that made me pull over and study the photographs more carefully. Maybe it was the way the town seemed to embrace the ocean rather than simply exist beside it. Maybe it was the small harbor with its working fishing boats and weathered docks, so different from the pristine marinas I was used to. Or maybe it was the simple fact that I'd never been here before, had no memories to haunt me, no expectations to fulfill. I found a small inn called the Anchor's Rest, perched on a bluff overlooking the harbor. The owner, a woman named Catherine with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, showed me to a room with a view that made my chest tight with something I hadn't felt in years. Wonder, maybe, or possibility. "How long will you be staying?" she asked as I signed the register. "I don't know yet," I answered, and realized it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. My phone had been buzzing intermittently during the drive, but I'd learned to ignore it. Now, setting my bags down in the simple, clean room, I finally turned it on to find 47 new messages. 47 attempts to drag me back into a world where I'd been reduced to a walking wallet and emergency contact. The first few were from Stella, her voice progressing from confused to angry to something approaching panic. "Dad, where are you? This isn't funny anymore. We need to talk about the house situation. Marcus talked to a lawyer. You can't just dispose of family assets without consulting us. There might be legal implications. Dad, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Please call me back so we know you're safe." The legal threat made me laugh out loud, a sound that echoed strangely in the quiet room. 3 years of being treated like an inconvenience, and now suddenly I was disposing of family assets rather than my own property. Marcus had left messages too, his tone carefully controlled but with an edge that revealed his true feelings. "Walter, this is getting out of hand. You're acting irrationally and it's affecting the whole family. We need to discuss this like adults. I've spoken to a financial advisor about your situation. There are ways to handle this that make sense for everyone involved. Call me." My situation. As if my desire to live independently was a medical condition that required professional intervention. But it was the message from my sister Rose that stopped me cold. "Walt, honey, I know you're hurting. Stella called me crying, saying she's afraid she drove you to do something desperate. I told her you're stronger than that, but I need to hear your voice. Please call me, just so I know you're okay. Rose." My younger sister who lived in Portland, who'd always been the voice of reason in our family. Who'd held my hand at Margaret's funeral and told me that grief was a journey, not a destination. If Stella had called Rose crying, she was either genuinely worried or putting on quite a performance. I dialed Rose's number, and she answered before the first ring finished. "Walt? Oh, thank God, where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Rose. Better than fine, actually. Stella says you sold the house without telling anyone. She says you've disappeared and she's afraid." Rose's voice trailed off. "Afraid of what?" "She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. She says this isn't like you, making impulsive decisions, cutting off contact." I walked to the window and looked out at the harbor, where fishing boats were returning with the day's catch. Men and women who worked with their hands, who understood the simple satisfaction of a job well done, of providing for themselves through their own efforts. Maybe this is exactly like me, Rose. Maybe I've just been pretending to be someone else for so long I forgot. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when did it become a breakdown to want to be treated with basic respect by your own family? When did it become irrational to expect your daughter to want you at Father's Day dinner?" Rose was quiet for a long moment. "She told me there was a misunderstanding, that you showed up unexpected and things got tense." "Is that what she called it? A misunderstanding?" I found myself telling Rose the whole story. Stella's words, Marcus's silent approval, the feeling of being erased from my own family. Rose listened without interrupting, and I could hear her breathing grow heavier as the details piled up. "Oh, Walt, I had no idea it had gotten that bad. Nobody did, because I kept trying to be understanding, to give them space, to be the kind of father who didn't impose. But somewhere along the way, not imposing became not mattering. And the house? The house was the last thing tying me to a life where I was tolerated instead of welcomed. So I cut the tie." Rose sighed, and I could picture her sitting in her kitchen, probably surrounded by the photographs of her grandchildren that covered every surface. Rose had been blessed with sons who married women who embraced her, who fought over who got to host family holidays, who called her just to chat. Where are you now? Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be useful to people who don't value me. Stella does value you, Walt. She's just what? Confused? Going through a phase? Rose, she told me to my face that I wasn't welcome at a family celebration. Her husband stood there nodding. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who they are. Another long silence. Then Rose said quietly, "What can I do to help?" The question surprised me. Not, "How can we fix this?" Or, "What do you need to come home?" But, "How can I help?" As if my decision to leave was valid, as if my feelings mattered, as if I had the right to choose my own path even if it upset other people. Nothing right now. Just know that I'm safe, and I'm not running away. I'm running toward something. I just don't know what it is yet. Will you stay in touch? Let me know how you're doing. I will. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and realized that for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call me back. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes to see if Stella needed something. I wasn't planning my days around being available for emergencies that might or might not be real emergencies. I was just here, in this quiet room, listening to the sound of waves against rocks and feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. The next morning, I walked down to the harbor and found a small cafe called Maggie's. The waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes and calloused hands, poured me coffee without being asked and set a menu in front of me. "You're new," she observed. Not a question, just a statement of fact. "How can you tell?" 23 years in this town. I know every face and I'd remember yours." She smiled. "Passing through or staying a while?" "I'm not sure yet." "Well, either way, the pancakes are good and the coffee's strong. That's about all any of us can guarantee." I ordered the pancakes and sat watching the harbor come to life around me. Fishermen preparing their boats, shop owners opening their doors, children riding bikes along the waterfront. A town that functioned without me, that had its own rhythm and purpose, that neither needed me nor resented my presence. My phone buzzed. Stella again. This time I answered. "Dad, where are you? I've been so worried." "I'm fine, Stella." "But where are you? Why won't you tell us where you are?" "Because I don't want you to come looking for me." The words hung in the air between us, honest and brutal. That's a terrible thing to say to your daughter." "No more terrible than telling your father he's not welcome at a family celebration." "I was having a bad day. I said things I didn't mean." "Did you mean them when you said them?" Silence. That's what I thought. "Dad, please come home. We can work this out. This is my home now. You don't even know where you are." "I know exactly where I am, Stella. I'm somewhere I can breathe without worrying about being a burden to anyone. Somewhere I can exist without justifying my presence." "You never had to justify anything with us." I almost laughed. "Stella, I've been justifying my existence to you and Marcus for 3 years. Every visit, every phone call, every attempt to be part of your lives has required an explanation of why I was necessary." "That's not true. When's the last time you called me just because you missed me? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday or a birthday, just because you wanted to hear my voice." Another long silence. "I have to go," I said finally. "I have a new life to build." I hung up and turned off the phone. The pancakes arrived steaming and golden, and for the first time in years, I ate breakfast without checking my phone once. I'd been in Millfield for 3 weeks when they found me. I should have known they wouldn't give up. The financial stakes were too high, the control too important to Marcus's carefully orchestrated life plan. But I'd gotten comfortable in my small rented cottage overlooking the harbor, comfortable with my morning walks to Maggie's cafe, comfortable with the rhythm of a life that belonged entirely to me. I was sitting on my front porch reading a book I'd bought at the local bookstore, something I'd never had time for when my days were structured around being available for other people's emergencies, when I heard the car doors slam, 2 doors which meant they'd both come. I looked up to see Stella walking up the gravel path, her face a mixture of relief and fury, with Marcus following close behind, carrying Tommy in his arms. My heart clenched at the sight of my grandson. Tommy looked confused and tired, probably wondering why he'd been dragged on a long car ride to see a grandfather who'd apparently vanished from their lives. Lucy wasn't with them, too young for the journey, probably left with a babysitter, but Tommy's presence was strategic. Marcus was too calculating to bring a 7-year-old along by accident. "There you are," Stella said, her voice tight with emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been? How scared Tommy was when I told him Grandpa had disappeared?" I set my book down slowly, feeling the peace of the last 3 weeks slip away like sand through my fingers. "Hello, Stella. Marcus." Marcus nodded curtly, but his eyes were already scanning my cottage, probably calculating its worth, wondering if this was where I'd transferred my assets. Tommy squirmed in his father's arms, reaching toward me. "Grandpa Walter, why didn't you tell us where you were? Mommy said you went away because you were sad." The words hit me like a physical blow. Of course, Stella had made this about my emotions, my inability to cope, rather than her rejection. In Tommy's young mind, I'd abandoned him because I was sad, not because his mother had made it clear I wasn't welcome in their family. "I wasn't sad, buddy," I said carefully, stepping down from the porch. "I just needed to find a new place to live. But why didn't you take us with you? It's pretty here." Out of the mouths of babes, Tommy saw the beauty of this place, the peace of it, while his parents saw only inconvenience and distance from their plans. Marcus set Tommy down, and the boy immediately ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs in the unconscious way children express love. I hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, feeling my resolve waver for the first time since I'd left. "Tommy, why don't you go explore the beach?" Stella suggested, her voice artificially bright. "Stay where we can see you, okay?" Tommy looked disappointed but obedient, walking down toward the water with the resignation of a child accustomed to adult conversations that didn't include him. The moment he was out of earshot, Stella's composure cracked. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded, tears already forming in her eyes. "How could you just disappear without a word? Tommy cried for 3 days thinking something had happened to you. I told you I was fine. I answered your calls until you started making legal threats. We weren't making threats. We were trying to protect you from making decisions you might regret later. Decisions about my own life and my own property." Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "Let's cut through the emotional manipulation, Walter. You sold a house worth $800,000 without consulting anyone. You've disappeared to God knows where, spending money with no regard for your future security or your family's inheritance. This isn't the behavior of someone thinking clearly. There it was, the real issue, laid bare without any pretense of concern for my well-being. My family's inheritance, as if my death was simply a delayed financial transaction. Marcus, that house was mine to sell, the money is mine to spend, and the idea that I need to preserve your inheritance while I'm still alive is exactly the kind of thinking that made me leave in the first place." Stella stepped between us, her hands shaking. "This isn't about money, Dad. This is about family. This is about not abandoning the people who love you." "Love me?" The words came out harsher than I intended. "Stella, when's the last time you treated me like someone you loved instead of someone you tolerated? That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me one thing you've done in the past year that showed you valued me as a person rather than as a solution to your problems." She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face cycling through emotions as she tried to find an answer that would sound convincing. "I invited you for holidays. You invited me to help with preparation and cleanup, while Marcus watched television and the kids played. You invited me to contribute money for gifts and food while treating me like hired help. You're exaggerating, am I? Last Christmas, when I offered to read Tommy a bedtime story, you said Marcus preferred to handle bedtime routines. When I tried to help Lucy with her puzzle, you said she needed to learn independence. But when the credit card bill for Christmas shopping was too high, somehow my involvement was not just welcome but expected." Marcus's face was reddening, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You're playing the victim here, Walter. We included you in everything. We made you feel needed. You made me feel used, because you were useful. That's what families do. They help each other. But apparently your help comes with strings attached. No, Marcus, apparently your love comes with strings attached." Stella let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. "I can't believe you're saying these things. After everything we've been through together, after Mom died, and we were all grieving." "We weren't all grieving together, Stella. I was grieving alone while you and Marcus made plans for my future that didn't include my input. I told them then about the conversation I'd overheard, about Marcus discussing me like a problem to be solved, about their plans to move me into senior living so they could claim their inheritance early. Stella's face went white, then red, then white again. That's not. That conversation wasn't. You don't understand the context. Then explain it to me. But she couldn't, because there was no context that made it acceptable. No explanation that would transform a discussion about manipulating me out of my home into evidence of love and concern. Marcus, to his credit, didn't try to deny it. Fine. Yes, we discussed options for your living situation. Yes, we thought you might be happier with people your own age, with activities and social opportunities. And yes, we talked about what would happen to the house. That's called planning, Walter. That's called thinking about the future. That's called counting your chickens before they hatch. That's called being realistic about what happens when elderly people live alone in houses too big for them, with no support system. I had a support system. I had a daughter who was supposed to love me. Stella's sobs intensified, and for a moment I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the impulse to comfort her, to take back my words, to minimize my own pain, to make hers go away. But I'd spent 3 years doing exactly that, and where had it gotten me? Tommy came running back from the beach, his pockets full of shells and his face bright with excitement. Grandpa, look what I found. Can you help me identify them? I knelt down to examine his treasures, grateful for the interruption. Sea glass, smooth stones, a few common shells. Simple treasures that delighted him because no one had taught him yet that their value was measured in dollars rather than wonder. This one's beautiful, I told him, holding up a piece of green sea glass. The ocean tumbled it for years to make it this smooth. Like it was in the washing machine? Exactly like that. Marcus cleared his throat impatiently. Tommy, get in the car. We need to talk to Grandpa alone. But I want to stay with Grandpa. I like it here. Get in the car, son. The sharpness in Marcus's voice made Tommy flinch. He looked up at me with confusion and disappointment, another casualty of the adult conflicts he didn't understand. It's okay, buddy, I said gently. Maybe you can visit again soon. Will you come home with us now? The hope in his voice nearly broke my resolve. This innocent child who loved me simply and completely, who didn't understand why his grandfather had suddenly become a stranger, who just wanted his family to make sense again. I am home, I said softly. This is my home now. Tommy's face crumpled and Stella immediately scooped him up, shooting me a look of pure accusation. See what you're doing? She hissed. See how you're hurting him? But I was done taking responsibility for hurts I hadn't caused. I'm not hurting him, Stella. This situation is hurting him. The fact that you're using a 7-year-old as emotional leverage is hurting him. Marcus took Tommy from Stella's arms, walking him toward the car with quiet reassurances. When he came back, his expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. This ends now, Walter. You've had your little rebellion. You've made your point, but enough is enough. You're coming back with us today, and we're going to work this out like adults. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, you'll never see Tommy or Lucy again. Stella's done playing games with someone who clearly doesn't care about his own family. The threat hung in the air like smoke. They were willing to use my grandchildren as weapons, to cut me off from the 2 people in the family who loved me without conditions. I looked at Stella, waiting for her to object, to tell Marcus that he couldn't speak for her, that she wouldn't participate in emotional blackmail. But she just stood there, tears streaming down her face, saying nothing. You'd really keep the children away from me because I won't live where you want me to live. We'd protect the children from someone who's clearly unstable. Unstable. The word Marcus had been building toward since he arrived. The narrative that would justify anything they did next. Court interventions, guardianship proceedings, whatever legal maneuvers they thought might restore their control over my life and assets. I walked to my front door and turned back to face them. Get off my property. Stella gasped. Dad, get off my property and don't come back unless you're invited. You can't mean that. I mean every word. I went inside and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as I listened to their voices rise in argument, heard the car doors slam, heard the engine start and the gravel crunch under tires as they drove away. Through my front window, I watched Tommy's face pressed against the back windshield, his small hand waving goodbye to a grandfather he might not see again for a very long time. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, letting them drive away. But it was also the most necessary. 6 months later, I was sitting on my porch watching the morning fog lift from the harbor when I saw the familiar car climbing the winding road toward my cottage. But this time, only one door opened. Stella walked up the path alone, moving slowly, uncertainly. Gone was the confident anger from her last visit, replaced by something I hadn't seen in her face for years: humility. She looked thinner, older somehow, as if the months since our confrontation had carved something essential from her features. I didn't get up from my rocking chair, didn't rush to greet her or pretend that time had erased the wounds. I just watched her approach, noting the absence of Marcus, the careful way she moved, like someone who'd learned that ground could shift without warning. "Hello, Dad." "Stella?" She stood at the bottom of my porch steps, hands twisted together, looking more like the uncertain teenager she'd once been than the confident woman she'd tried to become. "May I sit down?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, the one I'd bought hoping someday I might have visitors who came because they wanted to, not because they needed something. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching fishing boats return to harbor with the morning catch. The silence felt different than it had 6 months ago, less hostile, more thoughtful. "Where's Marcus?" I asked finally. "Gone." The word came out flat, matter of fact. "He left 3 months ago, filed for divorce last week." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and, underneath it all, genuine sorrow for my daughter's pain. Whatever else Marcus had been, she'd loved him, built a life with him, believed in the future he'd promised. "I'm sorry, Stella." She looked surprised. "Are you?" "I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry your marriage failed." "I'm not sorry he's gone." A small, rueful smile crossed her face. "You never liked him." "I tried to like him, for your sake, but no, I never trusted him." "Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" She considered this, then shook her head. "Probably not. I thought you were jealous of him, jealous that I had someone else to depend on. I was never jealous of your happiness, Stella. I was concerned about your judgment. Turns out your concerns were justified." I waited for her to continue, sensing there was more she needed to say. "He cleaned out our joint accounts before he left. Took everything except what was in my individual checking account, about $300. She let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out all those financial emergencies over the years weren't emergencies at all. They were a pattern. He was always spending more than he earned, always counting on someone else to bail him out. First me, then you. Always you, Dad. Even after we were married, even when he was supposed to be providing for us, it was always your money keeping us afloat. The mortgage payments, the car repairs, the kids' expenses. I thought we were just going through a rough patch, but we never weren't going through a rough patch." I felt a familiar anger rise in my chest, not at Stella, but at the man who'd manipulated both of us, who'd used my love for my daughter to fund his irresponsible lifestyle. What about the kids? They're with me. He didn't fight for custody, didn't even ask for visitation rights. "Tommy keeps asking when Daddy's coming home, and I don't know what to tell him." The pain in her voice was real, and despite everything, my instinct was to comfort her, to offer solutions, to try to fix what was broken. But I'd learned to recognize that instinct now, to question whether help was being requested or assumed. "What do you need from me, Stella?" She looked at me sharply, as if she'd expected different words. "I don't. I'm not here to ask for anything." "Then why are you here?" "To apologize." The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been practicing them. "To tell you that you were right about Marcus, right about the way we were treating you, right to leave when you did. And to ask if there's any way we can start over." I rocked slowly in my chair, watching seagulls wheel over the harbor. Start over. It sounded simple, but I knew it wasn't. Too much had been said. Too much trust had been broken. You couldn't just erase years of being taken for granted with a single apology. "Tell me about your life now," I said, instead of answering her question directly. "It's hard. I got a job at the library. Part-time, but it's something. Mrs. Henderson from next door watches the kids after school. Tommy's angry all the time. Lucy keeps asking for Grandpa Walter, and I'm tired constantly." She paused, but it's honest. For the first time in years, I'm living honestly. What does that mean? It means I'm not pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I'm not covering up Marcus's problems or making excuses for why we always need help. I'm not lying to myself about what kind of man I married or what kind of daughter I've been. The admission hung between us, raw and real. I drove you away, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I let Marcus convince me that you were the problem, that you were too needy, too dependent on us. But it was the opposite, wasn't it? We were dependent on you, and we resented you for it instead of being grateful. Why did you resent me? Because it was easier than admitting Marcus wasn't capable of taking care of us. Because accepting your help meant acknowledging that our life was built on a foundation of lies. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And because after Mom died, I was so angry at everyone and everything, and you were the safest target. You'd always forgive me, always try to understand, always be there no matter how badly I treated you. Until I wasn't. Until you weren't. We sat quietly again, processing the weight of her honesty. A fishing boat was coming into harbor, seagulls following in its wake, hoping for scraps. The scene was peaceful, routine, the kind of simple beauty that had helped heal something inside me over these past months. The kids miss you, Stella said eventually. I miss them too. Tommy still has the shells you helped him identify. He keeps them in a jar by his bed and tells anyone who'll listen about his grandfather who lives by the ocean. My throat tightened. How is Lucy? She's 4 now. She draws pictures of beaches and boats and writes for Grandpa on all of them. I have a whole stack of them at home. The image of my granddaughter drawing pictures for a grandfather she hadn't seen in 6 months nearly broke my resolve, but I'd learned to sit with difficult emotions instead of immediately acting to resolve them. I want to see them, I admitted, but I won't go back to the way things were. I don't want the way things were either. That life nearly destroyed all of us. What do you want? I want to be a daughter you can be proud of. I want my children to know their grandfather, and I want to earn back the right to call you family. Earn back the right. The phrase showed more understanding of what had been broken than any apology could. It would have to be different, I said carefully. I won't be taken for granted again. I won't have my worth measured by my usefulness, and I won't be manipulated or managed by anyone. I understand. Do you? Because 6 months ago, you and Marcus were ready to cut me off from my grandchildren to force me back into line. That's not something I can forget. Stella's face crumpled. That was Marcus's idea. I should have stopped him, should have stood up to him, but I was so angry and so scared about money that I let him speak for me. You stood there and said nothing while he threatened me. I know, and I've hated myself for it every day since. Hating yourself doesn't undo it. No, it doesn't. But maybe proving I've changed does. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. The confident mask was gone, the entitlement stripped away, leaving someone vulnerable and real and genuinely remorseful. How do you prove you've changed? By not asking you for money, by not assuming you'll fix my problems, by respecting your boundaries and your choices, even when they're inconvenient for me. And if I said I wanted to stay here, live my own life, see you and the kids occasionally, but not be drawn back into daily involvement in your problems, then I'd respect that, and I'd be grateful for whatever relationship you were willing to have. And if I said I wanted nothing to do with any of you ever again? Her face went white, but her voice stayed steady. Then I'd respect that too, even though it would break my heart. The answer surprised me. 6 months ago, Stella would have argued, would have made demands, would have insisted that family obligations overrode personal boundaries. This version of my daughter understood that love without choice wasn't really love at all. I don't want nothing to do with you, I said finally, but I also don't want to go backward. Forward then? Forward, but slowly, carefully, with honesty about what we both need and what we both can give. Relief flooded her features, but she didn't rush to embrace me or make grand promises about the future. She just nodded and said, "Thank you." A year later, I stood in my small backyard garden, watching Tommy and Lucy chase butterflies among the wildflowers I'd planted. They visited once a month, always with advanced planning, always with clear expectations about length of stay and activities. Stella had kept her word. She'd rebuilt her life slowly, finding strength I didn't know she possessed. She'd never again asked me for money, though I'd offered occasionally when I saw genuine need. She'd learned to solve problems on her own before involving me, to ask for advice without expecting me to provide solutions. The relationship we'd built wasn't the same as what we'd had before. It was better, based on mutual respect instead of obligation, on genuine affection instead of guilt, on choice instead of assumption. Marcus had disappeared completely, leaving behind only debt and custody papers he'd never bothered to sign. Stella had shouldered the responsibility alone, growing stronger in the process. "Grandpa Walter!" Lucy called out, running toward me with a dandelion clutched in her fist. "Look what I found." "It's beautiful," I told her, accepting the wilted flower with the solemnity it deserved. "Grandpa," Tommy said, appearing at my elbow, "will you help me build a sandcastle when we go to the beach later?" Of course I will. And I would. Not because I had to, not because anyone expected it of me, but because I wanted to. Because these moments were gifts, not obligations. Because this family, smaller and scarred but genuine, was worth rebuilding. Stella appeared on the back porch, watching her children play in my garden with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she called out. This time, I was invited. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.